Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Russell Means' daughter.
Yeah.
Turner.
Russell Means daughter.
Can't think of her first name. One final thing, May 1st is the mayor's race, so don't forget to vote. And I think we've taken enough of Bill's time. I gotta tell you about Bill Walsh. Where'd he go? Well, I was looking for a cowboy hat. You don't see the cowboy hat, you don't see Bill. Bill and I do go back a few years, back to both of our Mitchell days, some 40 plus years ago. I think the first time I really had a chance to talk with him was when he invited me on his TV program. He had one. What was it called? I forgot.
Well, we called it a lot of things.
So did other people.
That's right. It was probably This Is Celebration, which was in Sioux Falls, or A Terrible Beauty, which was in Mitchell.
Yes. I don't know what he asked me about. I certainly don't know my answers because I was a young freshman legislator at the time. So Bill and I go back that far. And over the years, we've connected more than once, I'm sure. He's an entrepreneur. He's a raconteur. He's something else that ends in URE, and I'm not going to say that. He's a great guy. I like to joke around with him a little bit. Let's welcome Bill Walsh to the stage.
Thank you, Denny. And my muscle just arrived, and Bob, they just arrived. And they're the fact checkers, because they've been riding the trail with me for some 50-some years. And so they're going to correct me after this talk. I used to wear Western clothes. When I was in the seminary, I always had my Western boots on. Was that allowed in the Lutheran seminary? Absolutely. Yeah, so Monsignor McCarthy was this great big tall Irishman. He was related, he was cousin to Gene McCarthy, who taught at St. John's. And one day he came out at our 5 o'clock, 5:30 special talk that he'd always give. And at the time, I had half the seminary wearing cowboy boots. And he said, if I find anybody at my talk tomorrow night wearing Western boots, you're automatically out of here. Well, there were 300 seminarians at the time, so it was about 150 seminarians that were wearing Western boots. 149 did not wear Western boots the next day. Only one came in, and you know who that was. And anyway, and I was actually with Big Lou when President Kennedy was assassinated, and he, I'll never forget, you know, the Irish just get angry with death, and I could just see the blood coming up into his head, and he was just tremendously angry with that assassination, which I'll talk about a little bit in this talk. But first of all, as your representative to the Democratic National Committee in D.C., we did have a meeting in D.C. just a little over a month ago. And the excitement and the enthusiasm coming out of all 52 states, all 50 states, is just amazing. And we're not only putting people running for the state legislature or running for Congress, but also running for the water board and the school board and the city council. We've got several Democrats. I think we have 3 Democrats in the city council in Rapid City. And that's our whole philosophy up and down the ticket, is that we're just not preparing for the next presidential election, where a lot of our energy has gone in the past. It's a grassroots, bottom up, let's run for whatever office you can run for, and we'll support you. We'll support you. So it's really exciting, an exciting time. We listened to several great speakers, 3 black mayors, women mayors we listened to. One of which was the mayor of Baltimore, and my daughter is now on her women's commission in the city of Baltimore, because that's where my daughter works, in Baltimore. By the way, Ann, on the way over here, I stopped last night and sat in your father's favorite chair at Chef Louis. Now, I did not order liver and onions. Love liver and onions at Chef Louis Steakhouse, and whenever I come across the state, I gotta, just to be inspired, I've got to sit down at George's table, and I sat down with Danny Copel and others, and just had a great memory of George. Matter of fact, they were going to fire my father back in the late 50s. My father worked for the Farmers Home Administration, great supervisor. Farmers still come up to me and say, you know, it wasn't for your dad, I would not be on this farm today. I mean, he was just that man of integrity. He always said, don't loan him too much and don't loan him too little. And anyway, under Nixon, they were getting rid of all the old timers. And Dan just told me this last night. He said, so your dad was to be fired, and I immediately called up George McGovern and said, George, do you have any influence with the Department of Agriculture? He says, who's it for? And Dan said, it was for my father-in-law, Bill Walsh. Oh, what a great Democrat. He said, I know the secretary's just right down the hall from me. 20 minutes later, he got a call from the senator. Tell Bill it's all done, it's all fixed. And my father then, when he heard the news, he worked 2 days and then he retired. True story. But it was always a matter of principle for him. And anyway, we had a great meeting in D.C. and one of the great things, a lot of attention is on South Dakota. Again, Billy Sutton got mentioned in front of the entire group, and this is the second time Tom Perez has done that. Said, we're excited about the run for governor in South Dakota, Billy Sutton. Second time Tom has brought that up. And due to the hard work, Sam is here. Where's Sam? He left? Yeah. Well, I'm not going to talk about him then. But to the hard work of Sam and Ann, we're one of a few states, right, Aaron? Maybe 5 states to get a grant from the DNC? Yeah. Probably 5 states, but we've got a $50,000 grant in order to put 2 organizers on the reservation. And to get the vote out and to organize not only Pine Ridge and Rosebud, but the other 7 reservations in the state of South Dakota. If we can get those people organized and get them to the polls, and that's what I want to say, you know, things really look good for Democrats. We've been electing Democrats all over the land, in Oklahoma and Georgia and all over the land. We've been electing Democrats, but it's not just the anti-Trump. It's because of shoe leather. We're knocking on doors wherever we can. We're out there working wherever we can and lining up volunteers right now to get on the phones all through the summer and into the election in November. Because it's going to take a lot of work. We know that in the state of South Dakota. We've been wandering around in the desert longer than the Israelites. 40 years. Right, we've been wandering around. So it's really exciting. We heard from a lot of great people at the DNC, and there's a lot of excitement. And we now have a Native American We moved it up from a council to a caucus, so the Native Americans are now have equal representation together with women, together with labor, together with all what I always call the McGovern Coalition of people that he put together after the 72 or after the 68 election, and the coalition that basically was the coalition behind President Obama when President Obama won. Now, having said that, you know, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself because that story will come up. But I just want you to know we're working hard, and I know we're going to be in Chicago for another DNC meeting. I know the DNC is really looking at South Dakota. We have a wonderful organizer out in West River. His name is Cole Adams, and he is, for the first, in Lawrence County, we've only won Lawrence County one seat in the history of the state. One legislative seat, and they voted for Reed because they thought they were voting for his Republican father, you know, which is what happened when Billy wins. A lot of people are going to be thinking they're voting for the Republican side of the Sutton family. So anyway, we've got some exciting young candidates. We had, my wife has a group called the Michael Moore Group. Every month they meet. It's a powerful group of men and women, and I know they were calling for you, Aaron, when you would send out alerts to call our legislators. They're an exciting activist group, but we've got the best three candidates I've ever seen in the history of Lawrence County running this time. So if we can win in Lawrence County, we can win everywhere in the state of South Dakota, and we're going to win in Lawrence County. All right, so make sure 10 minutes, give me 10 minutes for questions. Make sure I get that. So 50 years ago, the cities were burning. Detroit practically burned down. Martin Luther King is assassinated. The country goes wild. Every black community in the United States starts burning down their portion of the city. Summer of Love. There's a lot of stuff going on among the young people that Frank and I are working with. A lot of drugs, a lot of counterculture stuff. Every bit of authority is being questioned. Every father and cathedral parish is being questioned by their daughter and son who are going out to O'Gorman and saying, "Dad, what about this?" You know, and of course, Frank and I were right on the end of that. I remember going before, and Bobby was there the night I had to go before the KCs. Man, I thought it was a Ku Klux Klan event. I thought I was really going to get hung at that group because the parents were ticked off at all the undercurrents, the institutions that were being challenged, et cetera, during the 60s. It was a turbulent time. The Vietnam War. Kirby Doherty came up to me and said, "Father Bill, should I go in?" I said, "You know, I've been advising conscientious objectors, but I think you belong in the Army." And a year later, he was dead. Got shot in the back of the head, jumping into a helicopter in Vietnam. So it was a tough time. And then the president decided not to run. Eugene McCarthy challenged him in New Hampshire and almost beat him. That was the decision that Lyndon said, "Well, I'm not running." Then Bobby jumps into the race late, and he starts winning all the primaries. Gets to Oregon, and he loses Oregon. But he also brings up, going back to the record, he also challenges the people in there on gun control in '68 in Oregon. 50 years we've been challenging people with regards to gun control in the Democratic. gets to California. I decide to invite Dick and Nancy Knipe over for dinner. Back then, I was cooking for Father John Cash and I at Little Flower Parish. Matter of fact, at Thanksgiving, right before that, I cooked 2 geese, a couple of pheasants, 1 turkey for a Thanksgiving meal. I invited the Copels over from Mitchell and Dick and Nancy and my parents. And all of a sudden, everybody said they couldn't come except my mother and dad. I forgot to tell my mother and dad that I'd cooked all this food. And Dad walks into the kitchen and says, "We're going out to so-and-so to eat." Never once did I contradict my father. So I just turned off the heat, went out and had a great meal with my father and mother at Thanksgiving time. Sunday morning after Mass, I called a bunch of the clergy. I said, "Would you like a delicious meal tonight?" 8 of my priest brothers came over, sat around the table, just reheated up those delicious birds in that oven, fed it to them. They never knew the difference. True story. True story. So anyway, Dick and Nancy and I get through eating, and they're on the way back to Salem. And Dick calls me halfway up and says, "Father Bill, Bobby's just been shot." And I thought, oh shoot, here we go again. And because we were just sort of getting over the depression from John Kennedy being assassinated. So I turned on the TV and I went upstairs, and finally at 2:30 in the morning they said that Bobby had been killed and died. Well, I had a tennis engagement at 7 o'clock with Monsignor Sampson, head of the Catholic Army Chaplains. Big old tough cigar smoking, you know, parachuted into Normandy with the troops. And I come up to, we go out to where Frank and I played a lot of tennis in McKinnon Park. I go up to him, I said, "Monsignor, did you hear the bad news?" He said, "No, what?" I said, "Well, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated last night." He looked me square in the eye and said, "I'm glad they got that little son of a bee." That is how polarized, we talk about polarization today, we were really polarized in the 60s. You know, for a man of the cloth to say that, and he said it with hatred. He said he was glad that he was killed. But Monsignor was part of the whole military association, et cetera, and I'll get back to that in a little bit with regards to the assassination of John Kennedy. So we felt at a loss. And I understand how my wife, my daughter, and a number of the women that I know have felt such grief and a loss at the election being stolen up by the Russians and Donald Trump from Hillary Clinton. I understand that despair. I understand that despair, and it's true. It's affected a lot of people. Reminds me of, I don't know, Frank, were you with me when we went out to Pine Ridge and with Denny Bruggeman and did the parachute thing, and we went out to a Sundance on the Pine Ridge Reservation in '72, and we were sitting around in this parachute with a bunch of the young Indian guys, and we're passing a little Jack Daniels around, and And they explained how devastated they were when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, because he was their last great hope. The last great white hope. And as you know, he visited Pine Ridge right before he was assassinated. You know, and he took that little Indian boy with him and kept him on the campaign trail. And he was so frustrated and angry with regards to the conditions on that reservation at that time. Fast forward a couple months, I had been, as I may have told you last time, I was at Augustana College when AIM took over at Augustana College, and they invited me because I was working with Native Americans here in Sioux Falls. So I went in, spent 3 days with them, with Dennis Banks, and so they really felt that I was a brother. So Dennis, they take over Wounded Knee. Dennis calls me up and says, "Father Bill, get out here, we need you." And they just decided we had enough. We're not going to depend on anybody but ourselves to protect our values and our land, etc. That's how tight things were back in those days. I mean, it really was an interesting time. All right, so go back a few more years. I met Ethel Kennedy in 1983 at Hyannisport. Bobby Jr. asked Joe and I to come out to Hyannisport. And how many of you know that Ethel Kennedy's relatives, her great-grandfather, ranched and had a mining company down south of Marty Mission? You thought it was Scotch that provided all the money for the Kennedys, right? Yeah, her great-grandfather homesteaded and had a ranch, and I don't know what they mined, but they then put it on the railroad and shipped it to Chicago, and then he mixed it with some other chemicals, and he made a bundle off of it. And that's where a lot of the Skakel money originally came from. It was, Ethel would always say, Bill, go check it out. Go check it out in the courthouse in Tyndall. But you'll find my great-grandfather's name on a number of the mining records in the courthouse in Tyndall. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I mean, little things that you find. So I love Ethel. And we're at Hyannisport. Ethel says, "We're going sailing tomorrow." Great. Love to sail. So we jumped on the boat. She brought along a basket of Southern fried chicken and a gallon of daiquiris. Man, I love that woman. And then Bobby and I and Joan, we got on the boat and we sailed all over the harbor for a full day and talk, politics, science, environment. Ethel is so in tune to what's going on around her. And when we would have dinner at night, I remember she took us over to some friends in Hyannisport, same way. And but that dinner, that night, one of the proudest moments of my life, we were all sitting around the table. Ethel says, "Take off your shirt." I said, "What?" She said, "Stand up and take off your shirt." The Kennedys have no, they can run around nude in the house. They feel really comfortable. I've experienced it several times. So I stood up and I took off my shirt, and she said, "Bill, here you go. Made of the Resolute, John F. Kennedy's boat." The boat that we sailed that day was J.F. Kennedy's boat, the Resolute. What a kick. I mean, here's this little Irish kid from Mitchell, South Dakota. Yeah, never knew anybody else. Hero, right? Only grew up, regardless of the fact that he was staunch Republican. I used to take Joe Floss's mother Holy Communion. Who was the other one? Casey Tibbs. Casey Tibbs. This was before George. Casey Tibbs. And we did the ride from Casey's ranch 4 or 5 years ago from his ranch north of Fort Pierre and to Pierre. If you ever get to Fort Pierre, if you ever get a chance, go to his museum there, the Casey Tibbs Museum. It's a great, great museum. And right down below, they restored the railroad house, and you can buy a brick. So I bought a brick, and they said, well, Bill, you can put the inscription, whatever you want on there. So stop by the window of that train station, and you'll see my inscription. I'm not going to tell you what I put. I'm not going to tell you what I put. But anyway, Ethel and I and Max worked the reservations for President Obama in 2008. And on our way back to from the reservation, we had eaten in the Radisson Hotel the night before. And on the way to the airport, she said, Bill, I just got word that Teddy had a seizure. He's left the Senate. He's going to the hospital. Will you please take me back to the restaurant that we were last night? And I said, sure. And she was always saying, Bill, you're driving too fast. Bill, wait. She was always criticizing my driving. So I took it really sort of slow back to the hotel, and I blocked off the entrance. She said, Bill, I just want to go in and collect myself. Of all the tragedies, the Kennedy family, if you just think of all the planes. Joe died in a plane crash. Kick died in a plane crash. Teddy broke his back in a plane crash. And of course, John died in a plane. All of the drugs, you know. Just sit down with George or Dad and talk about addiction. Because we've all had addiction. Time? Okay. All right, I'll wrap it up.
It's a little bit more than 10 minutes.
Okay.
And because I cut you off, I'm going to ask the first question.
Okay.
You said that the 60s, and I went through that much younger than you.
Yes, you are.
I think you age better than I do. But anyway, I would say the 60s and the 70s, there was a division in our country. And I hope people get out of here, because I'm not here to defend Nixon. I think there's between Watergate and Russian collusion. I think there's a big difference between even Trump and Nixon. Nixon, to a certain extent, didn't have as much respect for the law, but you couldn't hold a candle to what Trump is doing to this country, and it's from the top down.
Argument with me and say after the '60s, the one George McGovern, the one hope that we had that kept the barrier of decency and hope alive was Senator McGovern in Allen, and I'll never forget that. We lost so many on the podium saying we gotta have farm parity. How many times did you hear that sermon from your father? And he was fearless. He was fearless in taking on. And then we had Dick Knight. All of a sudden, we started running Dick for governor, and we plagiarized everything that Bobby Kennedy did. Remember that? Frank? Then we took sheets out off Bobby's name and we put Dick Knives on there. And we plagiarized most of the Kennedy campaign, and Bob Nats was very, very much involved with that. Matter of fact, it was Bob and I and Frank and Rainey and Jimmy Hunziger and our leader from KSOO. Joyce Schuler. Joyce Schuler. Tom Brokaw came up with the term, the greatest generation. It's these guys that came up with the term, the second best term in the state of South Dakota, what is a knipe? Remember that? During the advertising, what is a knipe? The second best quote of that time. But I can't agree with you more. This is a absolute disaster. Where we're getting hope from is Billy Sutton and the people that are running for over here. Yes.
Regarding this hope, have you had a chance to listen to the interviews Jim Comey's been giving regarding his book, A Higher Loyalty? Because to me, that has given me some hope.
Well, yes, I think obviously, again, the federal government is under assault, and Jim is doing a good job of, I think, with honesty and decency, of protecting the FBI, you know, and protecting that institution, the Justice Department that you know, Bobby Kennedy ran so well all those years, going down to Mississippi with the troops and going down to Alabama with the troops and protecting the civil rights of our black people. Yeah, I think even though I disagreed with Comey when he came out 11 days before the election and opened up that whole email account thing, and I think he's had second thoughts about that too, but yeah, there's not a institution that hasn't been put down by this president. And go ahead.
Just on a personal note, back in the early 70s when I was getting started in South Dakota politics, your mother and I spent a lot of time campaigning door to door, folding brochures in the different party headquarters around town, and I missed her a lot. She was a lot of fun to be around. I just wanted to let you know.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. She was a wonderful bohemian woman. When I made the decision to deactivate from the priesthood, that was the toughest thing I had to do, was go to my mother. Matter of fact, when I was ordained, the bishop puts candles on you, around your throat. And the tradition is, when your mother dies, she is put into that casket with the candles so that Peter knows this is a mother of the priest. Well, shortly after I announced, I devastated my parents. My four sisters said, well, it's about time. How come you haven't done it 2 or 3 years ago, you know? So about a week later, Mother gives me the candles back.
Oh, wow.
I was devastated. And then when Ann died, right before they closed the casket, I slipped those damn candles
You mentioned the successes we've had and Democrats have had, and I'm concerned that they're superficial in that they're anti-Trump, and when Trump goes away, we might not. Because the core of the Democratic Party for decades was farmers and labor, both of which we've lost. Right. And that's a terrible concern to me. We seem to have gone from a blue-collar party to a white-collar party, and climate change and other white-collar things, and we lost lost Michigan of all places, and that really bothers me.
Yeah, well, it bothers me too, because when you take a look at the pictures of Bobby Kennedy's train going from New York to Washington, you look at the people standing along the tracks, those are the people that voted for Trump.
That's right.
That's the group of people that Bobby always had empathy for. He not only had empathy for the blacks and for Native Americans, he had empathy for the blue-collar guy. And I brought that up at the first DNC meeting that was held. I said, you know, what are we doing for Joe Sixpack?
Right.
So I think our motto should be, you know, apart from the fact that we're for labor, we're for the health care, we're against this horrendous tax thing that has been given to the wealth. One of the things we're doing, I'm going up to every blue collar guy I know and say, and woman that I know and say, is this thing helping you? No. Ask people. Ask people if it's helping them, you know, because I think it's a sham. I think it's a sham. But you're absolutely right. We've got to get back and my motto is imitate the Marines. We don't leave anybody behind in the Democratic Party. We don't leave anybody behind. We don't leave women behind. We don't leave the blacks behind. We don't leave the immigrants behind, the Native Americans behind, and we don't leave the blue-collar guy behind. We are going to fight for economic, social justice for that guy, just as hard as we fight for women having equal pay, all the things that the Democratic Party has stood for. But I think our best motto is, I know Tom Perez keeps talking about, well, we have your back, we have your back. But I think our motto should be, we don't leave anybody behind. You know?
Will you look on up in Verizon and give us the benefit, who would be the 3 or 4 or 5 individuals that you think would be really good running for president in 2020? Just give us 3 or 4 or 5 names that you think.
Well, I think, listen to Mayor Pete at McGovern Days. I tell you, this guy's an up-and-coming, he's tremendously articulate, he's a Harvard graduate, he's taken over South Bend, he's turned South Bend around. He is a wonderful example, and I don't know, he's going to run for higher office someday. I don't know if it's, but there are, I'm looking at young people like Mayor Pete. Now there are, you know, you can talk Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, you can talk about a lot, there's a lot of candidates, you know. We do run in almost every primary for the presidency, maybe 8 or 9 candidates. We've done that in the past, and so there's a ton of good, you know, I love Tim Kaine, but I don't think he's electable. But you know, this young mayor of LA, he may be a surprise. John Hickenlooper, I love John Hickenlooper from Colorado. He comes from a purple state, and he's been able to navigate that purple state very, very well, and he's a businessman, you know. So those are just a few. Yes?
So you're still close with the Kennedys. Is there any chance Joe will run?
So I sailed with Joe Kennedy.
Young or old? Probably.
I was 35 and he was 3. I sailed with him at Hyannisport, and I think he's the type of guy, but I hope we don't push him, you know. He's too young to be pushed at this time, but he certainly has his grandfather's empathy for the blue-collar person. I mean, I see that in Joe, and, you know, he's an old Peace Corps worker. He graduated, I think, from Harvard. You know, the Kennedys never sent in an application to Harvard. They just write on a piece of paper, I'm coming. So, well, listen, you've been a wonderful group of people. Get out there, work hard. I hope to see you all next weekend at McGovern Days. Mayor Pete is great. You're going to get a chance to listen to Billy and Randy and Tim. We've got such a great, Tim reminds me of your dad. He's a highly principled guy. We got a great bunch of candidates. And so let's come out of the desert and seek the promised land, okay?
Bill, thank you. I have one.
We don't come up here to entertain you. We come up here to inform you.
What kind of morons run this outfit?